Welcome back. My name is Ashley, and this is the Black Sheep Christian Podcast. Today, I am honored and blessed to have this very important conversation with Seth Gruber. Welcome.
Thanks, Ashley.
Seth is the founder of the White Rose Resistance and the writer and put a documentary together that you can find online at the 1916 Project. So he wrote a book called The 1916 Project, The Lion, the Witch, and the War We're In. This is going to be juicy. So first is what prompted you to start this project?
Yeah, so we launched my ministry right after the overturning of Roe versus Wade. So the summer of 2022. So we're just over 3 years old. We have resistance chapters all around the country. We mobilized the church to actually fight back against abortion, the sexualization of children, all of this insanity going on in the culture that the church historically has always stood against. And one of the first things we did was we launched a nationwide church tour, primarily me preaching in churches actually on Sunday mornings, that we're recognizing in this craziness of 2020, 2021 that like, oh, I think we actually have to stand up. People have to speak up. We actually have to push back. And so we did a bunch of tours in churches around the country, and it was primarily focused on the origins of wokeness, the sexual revolutionaries of the primarily the 20th century. Of course, you can always trace bad ideas further and further back if you want. And the feminists and the abortion movement and the cultural Marxists and the neo-Malthusians and the people who believe there's too many people on planet Earth, like all of these people were actually in bed together. Politically and metaphysically, sometimes literally, actually, that really architected this culture of death that we're in. And so I went down the rabbit hole, to borrow a very used phrase, on just all of the connections between the evil that was being normalized and celebrated in 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024 so quickly. And it really blew people's socks off. The reaction to nearly everywhere we went was, I've never heard any of this before. And these were like primarily conservative Christian churches that were actually pretty bold on most of the cultural issues. They weren't cowards. They were actually pretty well educated by their pastor. And it was those folks saying, I've never heard any of this before, with the origins and history of Planned Parenthood and the abortion movement and the sexual revolution. And so we realized, we need to turn this into a film and a book. And so that came out last year and is now streaming on Daily Wire Plus. And you can get the book most places you get books. And so it's called the 1916 Project because that year is when Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, who has been called the patron saint of feminism, opened her first clinic in the Brownsville neighborhood of Brooklyn, New York, an area heavily populated by many of those that she sort of deemed unfit to reproduce. And we played off of the New York Times 1619 Project, which came out at the end of 2019, about 9 months before George Floyd. And they said, basically, America sucks. There's no reason to like your country. It's systemically racist, root and branch. It argued that our birthday as a country should not be 1776, but it should be 1619, when the first Black slaves came to American shores. They said that date is so endemic of who we are as a country that should be seen as our country's origin, not 1776. And then the 1619 Project actually became like K through 12 curriculum in many schools. It became a series of podcasts and essays. It's now a docuseries special on Hulu. They argued that the American Revolution was fought to maintain slavery in the colonies, something that was so ahistorical that liberal left-leaning historians were writing letters to the Pulitzer Board, who gave the author of the 1619 Project a Pulitzer Prize, arguing that they rescind and remove her Pulitzer Prize because it was such historical nonsense and revisionism. And so what's interesting about that is that this led to that summer of 2020. Do you remember, like, everything's racist, cancel any company or corporation? And so the BLM, Antifa, 1619 Project revolutionaries started going after Aunt Jemima. I don't know. I guess we canceled Aunt Jemima syrup because somehow that's racist now. And they went after anything that they argued was racist. Well, the secular media called that very violent burning down major cities of 2020. They called those the 1619 riots, connecting that violent behavior in most of America's big cities to Nicole Hannah-Jones' 1619 Project that the New York Times published in the fall of 2019, saying basically, yeah, it's because of the heritage of slavery that people are justified in burning down privately owned businesses and destroying property because of the 1619 Project. And so it was the 1619 revolutionaries in the summer of 2020 that started going after any company or corporation that they said was racist in their origins. And here's where it gets, oh, irony of ironies. Actually, they put Planned Parenthood in their crosshairs. So the radical left who supports abortion, these were not pro-lifers, obviously. This was BLM Antifa crowd. They said in the summer of 2020, hey, Planned Parenthood, your founder is a racist. And she did damage to communities of color. And then the Planned Parenthood director of Greater New York at the time, Karen Seltzer, came out and said, you're right. We're done making excuses for our founder and the damage she did to communities of color. That was her phrase. They stopped giving out the Margaret Sanger Award, which Nancy Pelosi got and Hillary Clinton got. And I don't know if Obama got it, but he spoke at one of their events. And then they took her name off of their Manhattan Planned Parenthood clinic, which was called the Sanger Health Center. They took her name off, stopped giving out the award, and New York City took a sign off of that street corner that called it the Margaret Sanger Square. So basically, they canceled their founder, said, you're right, she's a racist, we're so sorry. After defending her for over 100 years, and the second the radical left wing attacked them, they said, you're right, she's a racist. And so we opened up the book and the film with this question. Okay, if you suddenly canceled your founder, then what's the real history and origins behind the largest abortion provider in the world, the largest provider of the pornographic comprehensive sexuality education in America's public schools, and the largest provider of cross-sex hormones and puberty blockers?
Wow, that was a lot. This is really interesting history, because as you were talking, my mind was thinking of different things and some new things to ask outside of what I even wrote down. And that is just knowing our history. You know, when I knew a portion of the history of Planned Parenthood, I didn't really dive that deep into it. I first learned about its founder just through somebody else, in conversation. I don't even know how we got to the subject. It was just that long ago. And then as you were talking, it made me think, especially about the award. The Nobel Peace Prize. That's another example of an award named after somebody who, created things that weren't beneficial for society. So one of my questions to ask is, when a history that is so that is just built on, I don't know if this is even the correct term, bloodshed. I'm maybe even being too dramatic about that. Um, when something is so in deep, as far as that being its foundation, people are seeing Planned Parenthood today as an essential part of their lives for medical services that they otherwise couldn't be able to get if they had insurance. Um, can can a service or its needs change because of how society changes? Does that make sense?
Well, so Planned Parenthood, many people actually don't realize this, but they did not begin performing abortions till the late 60s or early 70s. They were not founded as an abortion organization. So in many ways, what you're saying, although I think you might be saying the opposite, is actually true, is that as society changed, so did Planned Parenthood. They did not begin with killing babies. And now that's obviously like their largest source of income, although the transgender industry is quickly outpacing that. It's their fastest growing revenue stream now at Planned Parenthood. But they were started as a eugenics organization, not an abortion organization. Now, Margaret Sanger's disdain for prenatal human life is pretty evident. A lot of people say, look, Margaret Sanger didn't support abortion. There is like one quote where she sort of insinuated that maybe she was against abortion, but there's also a lot of writing that shows her blatant disregard for nascent human life. And we have a lot of those all cited with the original sources in my book, The 1916 Project. But she was a eugenicist, okay? Eugenics comes from the root word meaning good in birth. Meaning that there's some people that are good in birth and some people that are not good in birth. And this was unfortunately, a belief and almost worldview that infected a lot of conservatives as well as leftists. It was being driven largely by the left in America and in the West. But plenty of people, like, unfortunately, even like folks like Teddy Roosevelt, people that are seen as like pretty like conservative, were actually in bed with some of the eugenics movement in the early part of the 20th century, unfortunately. And Margaret Sanger got funding from all over the place. I mean, a wicked, vile woman, but she was very good at building. She was very good at fundraising. And there's an interesting connection, too, to her eugenics worldview of believing that there are some races and some classes of human beings that are just not as fit. They're not as strong, and she did not want them reproducing. That's the easiest way to describe eugenics to the layperson. What's interesting about that is Margaret Sanger's number one mentor, and she openly praises this man. His name was Havelock Ellis. I'm interested in all this stuff, Ashley. Maybe your listeners will be too, because biology, all history is biography.
Yeah.
All history is biography. It's made up of people. So once you get to know the people, what they believed, who they were reading, who influenced them, who did they spend time with, who were their mentors, that's when your eyes on history start opening up in terms of what they believed. And so Sanger's mentor is Havelock Ellis, and he published regularly in her magazine, The Birth Control Review, which she actually founded before the organizational structure was set up at Planned Parenthood. And she had traveled to the UK. And Sanger in 1914, I believe it was in December of 1914, fled New York City, where she was living, because she had been breaking the anti-obscenity laws at the time. So, okay, they were called the Comstock laws, which protected the male and the public from just kind of filth. Okay, and so she had been sending illegal recommendations on different forms of douches and birth control methods and this sort of stuff in these writings and pamphlets she was writing. And so rather than get arrested, she actually ships her kids off to be raised by her friends. Her friends forge her a passport, and she flees to England to avoid New York authorities. And she sort of, if I may say it this way, sleeps her way up the levers of power, including H.G. Wells, who wrote War of the Worlds, and Havelock Ellis, who was a neo-Malthusian. That refers to Thomas Malthus. He was an English clergyman in the late 1700s, who was the first person to predict overpopulation and massive starvation because there's too many people on planet Earth. You hear that said all the time today. Well, he was one of the origins. That's where a lot of that comes from. Malthus was a huge influence, by the way, on a guy named Charles Darwin. And then Darwin's half cousin, Francis Galton, coins a term: eugenics. Darwin's half cousin, Francis Galton, read his cousin's book, Origin of Species, and was so, quote unquote, inspired and moved, Ashley, that he writes his own book on eugenics and basically applies his cousin's Darwinian principles and says, let's apply that to the human race. Later, Darwin would do that in his book, The Descent of Man. But Galton, who coins the term eugenics and is the modern father of the eugenics movement, really was inspired by Charles Darwin, his half-cousin's work. Now, guess who Francis Galton begins to disciple in a pen-pal relationship, encouraging this individual's radical writings and revolution in the UK? Havelock Ellis, Margaret Sanger's affair, sexual partner, and mentor, who coaches her journey back to New York. And actually advised Sanger to tone down her more revolutionary sounding themes like communism and focus on the more scientific sounding themes of birth control and eugenics. What's really hard for a lot of Americans to believe today, Ashley, is that eugenics was celebrated as an academic discipline. It infected many of the different academic disciplines in the universities. It was seen as the way to progress. This is how we're going to perfect the human race. Today, we rightly think of eugenics with the sort of disgust that it deserves, because it doesn't treat human beings as fundamentally equal in dignity, value, and worth, but it creates Darwin's survival of the fittest. And anyone who's viewed with infirmities or disabilities or lower IQ, or many times for the eugenicists, by the way, Ashley, certain skin color, those people are viewed as less than. We view that rightly with the correct sort of disdain that we should. But in the late 19th and early 20th century, this was celebrated lauded. I mean, there was a eugenics chair at Harvard. Okay. So like we just have to remember like this was the water that a lot of these people were swimming in. And
Yeah.
so Margaret Sanger starts focusing more on eugenic themes, which were more acceptable at the time, than on her more revolutionary communist themes. And
Mhm.
Havelock Ellis, one of Sanger's many affairs, coaches her journey back to New York. And in 1916, she opens the first illegal birth control clinic in the Brownsville neighborhood of Brooklyn, New York. Now, some people will say, well, Seth, listen, I did a little bit of reading and a fact check. You're lying to me. Margaret Sanger just wanted to help poor minorities control their fertility, which was harder to do back then. And oftentimes the poor were having more children than they could afford. And so shut up, Seth. You're doing revisionist history. She just wanted to help poor minorities plan their parenthood. That's not true. Here is how Margaret Sanger defined birth control. Here's a direct quote. If people want to fact check this, buy my book. You can read all of Sanger's direct sources that I link to, often in the first editions of her books that I actually have in my office. She said, birth control is not contraception thoughtlessly and indiscriminately practiced. Birth control means, and here's where it gets really disgusting, actually. This is Sanger's words. Birth control means the cultivation and release of the better racial elements in our society and the gradual suppression, elimination, and eventual extinction of defective stocks. You know, those human weeds who threaten the blossoming of the finest flowers of American civilization, end quote. Those are Margaret Sanger's words. So you can't say she just wanted to, by the way, she coined the term birth control. You can't just say that she wanted to help poor minorities plan their parenthood and control their fertility. She said, no, birth control does not mean contraception. It means the cultivation and release of the better racial elements in our society. Meaning she believed that some races were better and some were not. That's the founder of Planned Parenthood. So that's a lot of the origins and the soil of Planned Parenthood. So that starts to make sense why 79% of Planned Parenthood surgical abortion facilities before the overturning of Roe versus Wade were within walking distance of majority Black and Hispanic neighborhoods.
Correct. Correct. Oh, okay. I'm like digesting and I'm collecting my thoughts at the same time. Um, you know, this subject is very interesting in the fact of the just being where we are today. And it is such an interesting subject because it really just it's just not clean. It just complicates because when you think about it today, the cost of having a child is significantly more than what it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago. You know, childcare is high. Medical expenses, people are worried about their Medicaid, Medicare right now because of subsidies. During the pandemic, there was a formula shortage at one point, So it just ew. So with this, and then with this, instead of let's stop killing babies, I mean, Jesus, because that's what the abortion movement, and I mean, how can this be to save families, if that makes sense?
Well, yeah, I mean,
Be-
listen, beware of logogogs and lexicographic molesters. So
okay.
logogogs, so word tyrants, and lexicographic molesters, those who rape the English language to make it mean whatever they want it to mean.
Yeah,
Language is so powerful, right? Like words are powerful,
correct.
because language shapes the way we think and it colors the way we see the world.
Yes.
Because words are expressing realities. And so when I say man, now I know this is shocking to people in the 21st century, but I actually don't mean woman. So man it's a pointer. Words are pointers. So it's referring to something in the real world, man. So that's referring to something that actually exists.
Hmm.
Words are pointers. Words reflect that there is an external reality, and we're trying to give expression to that, right? We're trying to give shape to that. When you use words to describe something that is not realistic, when you redefine concepts so that this word now is describing something else. It's not actually healthcare. It's not actually empowerment. It's not actually pro-family. But those are the words that you're using to describe it. That's very deceptive. It screws with people. And eventually, the longer you use those words, the more you come to believe the lies that you're articulating. And so the left's been saying abortion is healthcare, feminism, equality, women's empowerment for decades and decades and decades. And it's very damaging. And so we always are very careful at our organization, the White Rose Resistance, and all of my speaking. We just call abortion baby killing, child sacrifice to pagan deities, child sacrifice to the god of self, convenience, education, money, and career well-being. It is demonic. There's nothing new about sacrificing children and babies with the belief that you'll receive a blessing in return and your life will somehow be blessed. But yes, of course, there are lots of extenuating circumstances. It is very expensive today. I mean, the inflation's insane. It's so much more expensive to live. Gen Z doesn't know how to buy a home. It's way more expensive to raise kids than it used to be. All that you said is absolutely true. But the left in our culture has taken advantage of that to tell women, men, families that you can't make it. You need abortion to be free. You need this in order to succeed. How are you going to pay for the other kids you already have? You're barely cutting it already. You're barely making it now. You're going to need this.
Right.
And so we can acknowledge all of those difficult circumstances, and we should. This is part of the reasons that this one of the problems with our politically corrupt system is oftentimes it feels like neither political party really cares about the people who are actually struggling. Now, I'm not advocating for socialism. I'm advocating for the free market system that makes everything cheaper, okay, and a competitive system. And then there's the whole healthcare thing and all of that too, which has all of that's been increased oftentimes because of the abortion lobby. So it's interesting. The people who say like, oh, we need abortion because of the cost of living and families, people can't afford kids, they need this. The reality is that a lot of healthcare costs have been driven up exorbitantly because of the abortion issue. This is a conversation we probably don't have time to get into just given time constraints, but I've had very long conversations about abortion's link and impact to breast cancer, preterm delivery and future pregnancies, and mental health. We did a whole podcast with my friend Alex Clark over at Turning Point USA, her Culture Apothecary show. They took off, and then we had a Daily Mail calling us liars and libeling us, and we might be suing them. Because the left has hidden this from women. But the reality is that abortion has a very negative impact and increases your chances of mental health, preterm delivery and future pregnancies, and breast cancer exorbitantly. That drives up the healthcare costs. That costs more money. So you could also make the argument that it's because we've been killing babies through abortion that so much of the healthcare costs are so expensive. So the reality is that hardship doesn't justify homicide. That's the reality of it. We can acknowledge all those difficulties. We should work to help people. We should look for our neighbor. We should look out for our neighbors. We should try to lift up the next guy. The church should be engaged in loving the poor and helping people who struggle to make ends meet. But none of those difficulties justify killing your baby.
Agreed. Thank you for that. There are some points that you said that I didn't know. There's statistics in there I didn't know. I didn't know that increased cancer rates. I
I'll give you one. I'll just do a little bit of the data points on breast cancer since you're interested in
Yeah.
it, but we don't have time to get into the whole thing. So 1 in 9 women will have to deal with breast cancer at some point in their life. One interesting comparison is that in 2003, a study was released called the Women's Health Initiative that looked at the risk of postmenopausal hormone replacement and its risk of causing cancer. And I'm only saying this as a comparison so that when I'm done with this analogy, you and your listeners will understand the unequal outrage from the abortion lobby as compared to this study in terms of like, okay, here's a thing you do. How's it going to impact your health in the future, mom? Okay, like doesn't matter what the thing is. Here's a thing you do. How's that going to impact your future health? And the discrepancy between how the media treats this example I'm about to give with abortion tells you everything you need to know about the abortion lobby. Okay, so it's called the Women's Health Initiative. Again, it looked at the risk in cancer from postmenopausal hormone replacement. And this study found that the risk of breast cancer would be increased by 8 cases per 10,000 women per year. 8 cases per 10,000 women per year. But this tiny increase in study caused a national panic. I'm friends with many OBGYNs, obviously, right, who are pro-life, and they consult with us. And those who were practicing medicine, who were doctors, who were OBs at the time in 2003, said that their phones were ringing off the hook of women because of the study and then the media attention that it got of women who were on postmenopausal hormone replacement, who were calling their OB saying, am I going to get cancer now? Why did you not tell me this? How could I not know this? This is evil. I mean, nationwide panic happened in 2003 when that happened, Ashley. Okay. So what do you think an objective media would do if they heard the following numbers? An objective media would cause a national panic and outrage that makes the Women's Health Initiative study look like child's play. There would be riots in the street and protests of pro-choice women, pro-abortion women outside every Planned Parenthood in America, not because they care about the unborn child, but because they'd feel like they were lied to by the abortion lobby who didn't tell them the risks for their future health from having had that abortion. And so here's the data on breast cancer, and it's linked to abortion. Between 1957 and 2018, there were 76 studies, 76, around the world published in peer-reviewed journals that evaluated the linkage between abortion and subsequent breast cancer. 60 out of the 76 studies showed a positive association between having had an abortion and increased risk of getting breast cancer in the future because of that abortion. And more than half of those 60 studies had a statistical significance that met or exceeded the 95th percentile. 24 of those 76 studies were done in the United States, and 19 of them confirmed a positive association. Now, when the abortion lobby says that abortion does not impact or affect women's future health in any way, shape, or form, which, by the way, that is their claim, and it has been for decades, that abortion does not negatively impact women's future health in any way, shape, or form. That's their case. It always has been. They point to a book primarily to bolster this claim called The Safety and Quality of Abortion Care in the United States, written in 2018 by the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. That book, The Safety and Quality of Abortion Care in the United States, put together by the National Academy of Sciences, looks at exactly 1.5 pages of the whole book is committed to looking at the linkage between abortion and increased risk of breast cancer for the women who got an abortion. Guess how many studies the National Academy of Sciences looked at in their study to say, in their book, guess how many studies they looked at out of those 76 that I told you have been done around the world between 1957 and 2018. How many studies did they look at to argue that there's no danger or risk to your health, woman, if you get an abortion? They looked at 3.
Oh, it was close. I was thinking 1.
Of those 76, Ashley, to argue that there's no association or relationship between abortion and breast cancer. And all 3 of those studies that they looked at, Ashley, came from the 16 of those 16 of the 76 that didn't find an association. So remember, there were 76 studies and 60 of the 76 showed a positive association. All 3 of their studies came from the 16 left of that total 76. And those 16 that said there was no association, they pulled from all 3 of their studies they looked at from those. So there is a plausible biological, by the way, and physiological explanation as to why allowing a pregnancy to begin to stimulate the breast, but then stopping it so that the breasts don't progress to a mature state that produce milk would result in breast cancer. So having had a child early in life, going full term, delivering the baby, and then nursing the baby provides an incredibly high level of protection against breast cancer because those mature ducts and glands and cells and glands in the breasts are very resistant to becoming cancerous. And 97% of breast cancers arise in immature ducts or glands. So abortion causes the number of immature glands to proliferate, but then never causes them to mature. So they spend many more years in a proliferative state that is very prone to becoming cancerous. So anyways, that's a little bit, there's more on that as well, but it just goes to show that while there's 76 studies that looked at this between 1957 and 2018, and 60 of the 76 showed that yes, there's a relationship between
Mm.
having had an abortion and future breast cancer. The abortion lobby who says, hey, kill your kids, mom, nothing will ever bad happen to your future health. The way that they argue from that is by looking at the minority, the super minority of the cases that said there wasn't a relationship and only pulling from those. So yeah, we've been being lied to for a long, long time. And so think about how much more expensive healthcare costs have become treating breast cancer. Think of what it's done to the health of women.
Right.
Now, obviously, I don't make my arguments against abortion based off of, well, it might negatively impact you. I make my argument
Mm.
by saying that's a human being in the womb, and that human being has a right to life. That's why abortion is wrong. But with anyone with a semi-functioning prefrontal cortex should be able to see, oh yeah, abortion's super unnatural, so that would make sense that it might also negatively impact your health. And the fact that the abortion lobby has been lying to women about that should tell you everything that you need to know about them.
Yeah. You know, going back to, thank you. Um, Going back to the documentary in the 1916 project, you know, everything was out in the open. I mean, you named quite a bit of names that I never even knew were that I never knew the connections of whom who's who, you know, in this idea bank. Because this was so open, and how did it even become hidden? Like how did we get here for it to become hidden?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll share a couple more things, and I think you and your listeners will immediately go, "Oh yeah, if most people knew that, they would run." So
Yeah.
far from Planned Parenthood and the modern Democrat Party that supports them no matter what. And so why do they hide it? Because it's so shocking and evil that if most people understood it, they wouldn't want to be a part of it. And that also stands, by the way, for most liberals. I think most reasonable liberals, meaning that like they don't have rainbow colored hair yet and they haven't pierced every part of their body. I think most reasonable liberals, if they hear the couple things I'm about to say, would be like, "Oh, yo, maybe I'm not pro-choice. Yo, maybe I don't support that, man. I had no idea." Right? So like knowledge is power, right? And,
Yeah.
and a lot of the stuff that about the origins of Planned Parenthood, which really you have to remember, it's not just the origins of abortion, it's a lot of the origins of the sexual revolution, the origins of cultural Marxism. They were laying siege to the foundations of Western civilization, which was built by Christianity, and they didn't like that. And so it's always way bigger than abortion. Like abortion comes pre-packaged with all manner of paganism. It's not like you can just deal with abortion in a cute little box. Like here's the baby killing box, and then over here is the feminism box, and then over here is the communism box, and then over here's the cultural Marxism box. It's like no, they kind of all are connected. When people understand the origins of that, um, they begin to shift how they think, how they live, and how they vote. And so a lot of this was openly known at the time in those first 3 or 4 decades of Planned Parenthood. But because you can see these claims in books that were written
Hmm.
about Sanger at the
Hmm.
time, and articles, like it was more common knowledge, like you were saying. And over the years, if you've done your homework like me, which unfortunately most people haven't, you start to see the coverage of Sanger, the coverage of Planned Parenthood become a
Hmm.
lot softer. And a lot of those more shocking elements that a lot of people knew in the early parts of the 20th century begin to be removed from a lot of the books and the biographies. And so
Hmm.
it's just removed from the public eye, and you have to do the research. You have to be a nerd and go down the research path to find and be like, oh wait, people used to know this. And so here's one of those things. Planned Parenthood's founding board member was part of the Massachusetts KKK.
Oh.
Planned Parenthood's founding board member was referred to as the exalted cyclops of the Massachusetts KKK chapter. His name was Lothrop Stoddard, for people that want to go confirm that. Lothrop, Lothrop, and Stoddard, Stoddard. In my film, The 1916 Project, we have scans of the Birth Control Review, Planned Parenthood's magazine, showing the board of directors at the time in Planned Parenthood's magazine. And right there is Lothrop Stoddard's name. And he sat in that board position for years.
Mm.
He was one of the intellectual fathers of the KKK, so his writings were recommended reading in various KKK chapters around the country, Ashley. He wrote a book called The Rising Tide of Color Against White World Supremacy. That was the title of one of his books. His other book was called The Revolt Against Civilization, The Menace of the Underman.
Mm.
And you go, wait, who's the Underman, right?
Mhm.
Who's the Underman, Lothrop, and why is he a menace? Who are you talking about? Well, for him, actually, that would have been blacks, Slavs, Italians, Jews, and other like mentally and physically disabled people. And that book, The Menace of the Underman, was really well loved by these group of National Socialists in Germany in the late 30s. And so they paid for the German translated version of Lothrop Stoddard's book into German. And I actually have the German translated version in my office here. I can't believe I found it for sale online. It shipped from Europe. It took weeks to get here. I can't find any sale online anymore. I just got lucky. So I actually have the German translated edition with Lothrop Stoddard's name on it. And guess how the Nazis translated the word Underman from his book, The Menace of the Underman? In German, it says Untermensch. Now, Untermensch, kind of translated in English, is also means subhuman. And it's how the Nazis referred to those that they exterminated as Untermensch. In fact, this might interest you. One second.
Oh boy.
This is a first edition copy. It's quite
Oh my
vile, but
God.
of Heinrich Himmler's famous Nazi propaganda book.
No
And
way.
so look, it says what does that say? Der Untermensch,
Wow.
right? So I'm not just blowing smoke here. So this is very ancient. It's falling apart. It's from the 40s, and it contrasts Aryans with Jews and other people that the Nazis didn't see as fully people.
Yeah, yeah.
But the point is that historians, and to my knowledge, I guess I'm a lay historian. I'm not one by trade or professionally, but historians didn't really begin to the Nazis didn't really begin to use the word Untermensch until the German translated version of Margaret Sanger's board member's book came out.
Mm.
So Margaret Sanger's board member was so well loved by the Nazis that he was actually invited to the Third Reich in 1939.
Mm.
And he met with Heinrich Himmler, Fritz Sauckel, Robert Ley, and a brief meeting with Adolf Hitler. And to my knowledge and research, Lothrop Stoddard, the founding board member of the largest abortion provider in the world, is the only American to have had a one-on-one meeting with Adolf Hitler after he rose to power. And he talks about it in his book. Lothrop Stoddard comes back to America and he writes a book called Into the Darkness, Nazi Germany Today. And it's hard to not blush reading his descriptions of meeting with Hitler, because he was just fanboying basically. And he describes his one-on-one personal meeting with Adolf Hitler in the Third Reich in 1939. And so that's the founding board member of
Mm.
Planned Parenthood.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that. I learned a lot. I'm gonna
But
be
think about it, Ashley. What does
it
the modern left say? And the BLM crowd and the Antifa crowd, what do they say? They say that if something is founded and started in racism, it's irredeemable. The roots are rotten, so the whole tree has to come down. I mean, literally, Chris Cuomo, the stupider Cuomo brother,
oh
when he
God.
was still at CNN, said in the summer of 2020, as BLM and Antifa were burning down Seattle, Portland, LA, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Detroit, Chicago, Washington, D.C., Austin, Texas, right? The list goes on and on. He said, you shouldn't be screaming at these people. You should be asking yourself what drew your fellow Americans into the street to behave like this. I mean, like the legacy media fully defended this violent insurrections all across the country. And the case was exactly what the 1619 Project argued, that America was started in quote unquote racism. And so there's actually no redeeming it. Like you can't just course correct. Their whole argument was that it's so rotten, the whole thing has to be burnt to the ground and rebuilt from the ashes. So I always just want to say, then apply that same ethic and standard to Planned Parenthood as well.
Mm. Understood. Understood. I'm digesting. I'm I had thoughts on top of thoughts on top of thoughts at the same time, and now I'm trying to go back to some of the thoughts that I was thinking
Well,
about.
and then in 1939, Ashley, while you're collecting your thoughts, Margaret Sanger launched the Negro Project. That's what she called it, not me.
Yeah.
She called it
You,
the Negro Project.
you know, it's interesting because now this may be, I may be going off topic, but I'm just going to little me and school thoughts. And I remember little me was like when we were talking about World War II and how we entered World War II after Japan and Pearl Harbor. And little me was like, well, they had to have known about the Holocaust before Japan did. Like, why did we take so long to even be part of this war? But with this conversation, and some that I've had in the past, it feels like we took so long because we were just seeing if it was going to work out. I mean, am I wrong about that?
Yeah, things get complicated on the geopolitical stage, don't they? But certainly, some people were aware of what was happening. Some people were denying it. Some people were struggling to believe whether what was happening was true or not. But thank God that we eventually did intervene. Hitler's plan was to take over all of Europe. he wasn't just he wasn't just focused on the German Volk.
No,
He wanted
no.
to take over all of Europe. But yeah, here we are. Not that many decades later, and the same rotten fruit is quite normal in the minds of most Americans and on most university campuses. We
Yeah.
still have a society that believes that not all human beings are persons and not all human beings have a right to life. Instead of it being Jews or gypsies or homosexuals or the mentally and physically disabled, it's babies. It's
Yeah.
babies in the womb that are not recognized as full persons. And we probably killed about 70 million or more babies in America since 1973.
Yeah. Now, switching gears, I'm also thinking about, when Roe v. Wade was overturned, a new issue was beginning to crop up, and that is those who want to have families but have complications or medical risks. Um, my question is, you know, we may not need Roe v. Wade for abortion, but I mean, should our laws change in order to provide families who do want to be able to have a family, but medical complications happen, and for doctors to be able to do what they need to do to be able to save the mother at least, or the baby at least, in order for them to, at least for mom and dad to be able to want to have children again.
Yeah. So, great news for the whole world. Abortion is never medically necessary to save mom's life.
Okay.
And I have been, I've actually had my Instagram nearly deleted because of saying that. I had my YouTube channel give a strike because I said that. And we had a fact check put on my Instagram reel that took off with, actually, I was on stage with my friend Charlie Kirk making that point when we got fact checked and the whole liberal fact checking agencies turned out to say that this was wrong. The reality is, if you talk to any OBGYN who's not in the throes of leftist ideology, but is actually a good doctor, they will tell you the same thing. Abortion is never medically necessary to save mom's life because thankfully in the 21st century, we can almost always save the life of both mother and child. If the pregnancy is what is a threat to mom's life, meaning that if the pregnancy continues, mom may or will die, then I always love to ask pro-choicers on college campuses this question, Ashley. It just goes to show how stupid the next generation is, by the way. I just ask them, so is abortion the only way to end pregnancy?
Uh,
And sometimes they have to think about it for a second, and the answer is no. And then I say, what's the other way to end pregnancy? It's called childbirth. And so if the pregnancy is what is going to take mom's life in these, and by the way, they happen, they're rare, right? But they happen, Ashley, these horrifically complicated situations where maybe she has underlying health issues, right?
mhm.
Anyways, it's like, okay, her blood sugar's plummeting, her heart rate, it's, her blood pressure, she's going to die, whatever. Some women have to be on bed rest almost their whole pregnancy. Like, I get it. The reality is that you deliver the baby. You don't kill the baby and rip their limbs off. okay, or suction their arms off, depending whether it's a forcep late term abortion or it's a suction catheter tube. You just deliver the baby. And if you can adequately care for mom and keep her stable to the point that the baby is gestationally developed enough to be able to be delivered and live, then you can save both mother and child. If you can't, and let's say it's first trimester, right? Right, like you can't save both mother and child, then you still induce early labor and you deliver the baby and give that baby as many minutes with the mom as he or she can breathe. But that's not an abortion, because the intent of an abortion is to kill the child. The intent in an early delivery, that because of a life-threatening pregnancy, is to save the life of the mother. It's the same thing with an ectopic pregnancy, when the baby implants in the fallopian tube rather than the uterine. You perform a salpingectomy or a salpingostomy. Notice how the surgical names aren't even an abortion, because the intent in an abortion is to take the life of the child. The intent in a salpingectomy is to remove the baby from the fallopian tube, because if that continues, the fallopian tube begins to expand, it bursts, and mom and baby die. So the intent is to save the life of the mother. The death of the child is a foreseen but unintended consequence. So it's completely different. And so even in rare life-threatening circumstances, Ashley, you just deliver the baby. You just delivered it. And then maybe, and usually, you can get the baby to a gestational point where they can survive and you can save both mother and child. But abortion, the surgical act of abortion, is never necessary to save mom's life.
Thank you. You know, I recently read, the reason why I thought about that was because I recently read an article where scientists are creating an artificial womb, if you may, where if it's like 22, 26 weeks, for some reason, medical complication, mom can't carry the baby. They're able to, the plan or the idea is to make this artificial womb for the baby to be able to still grow and flourish. Which made me think of that question, because the article, the study came out not too long ago, which was quite fascinating in itself. But
Yeah,
it
some
made me think
pro-lifers
about
are
that.
excited about that, actually, because they think, isn't this a great way to be able to, prevent or help women and families have babies who have, medical issues where they can't have a baby. Isn't this a great way to have more babies? Absolutely not. I hope we ban artificial wombs once they become viable, and I hope that they never exist. All that will do, Ashley, is lead to factory farming of babies. We already have a culture that does not treat babies as people with a right to life, with the same intrinsic dignity and value and worth as any single one of us. We already have an abortion industry in America that's harvesting the organs of babies, sometimes while they're still breathing after they've been aborted, or certainly cutting them up right after they die to harvest their organs. This was the whole Planned Parenthood lawsuit against David Daleiden in 2015, because he exposed that Planned Parenthood is harvesting, against federal law, fetal organs for experiments, for solutions to drugs or vaccines or all this filth. Actually, Francis Collins, who was Anthony Fauci's boss, in 2021, we learned that they were doing full-term abortions at the University of Pittsburgh and then scalping the heads of full-term aborted children and grafting them onto lab rats to create humanized mice, so that the rat had human DNA in it, so that they could do testing to find solutions to staph infections, because the rat had some human DNA in it. I cite all of that in my book, The 1916 Project, with all the citations and proof for you to go see that actually happened. You can go Google those photos. You can go Google Francis Collins, University of Pittsburgh, grafting fetal scalps onto rats, and you can find pictures that got leaked through FOIA requests of this being the case. So we already have a culture that not only doesn't value the lives of unborn children, Ashley, they're happy to harvest body parts to benefit born people who are seen as more fit and strong, who can benefit off of the lives of preborn children. If we have a society where artificial wombs are normalized and taken for granted and seen as progress and a blessing of liberty, all that's going to mean is that, well, one, actually, by the way, pedophiles will go and take their sperm and they'll buy a poor woman's egg. They'll use in vitro fertilization. Then they'll gestate a baby in an artificial womb so that they can take the baby home to sexually abuse them. That's already happening in America right now. I see a story about every other month in the West, actually, where a single male or two dudes because you don't have to go through background checks in big fertility. Now, if me and my wife want to adopt, Ashley, we have to go through background checks if we want to adopt. We have to
Right.
have home studies and home visits to make sure that they get to know our family and our home, and that this is going to be a safe and loving place for this child. But in
Mm,
big fertility, the only check that has to clear is the check you write to the bank.
mm,
So gay dudes, there was a story just a couple years ago. Two gay dudes, they one of them got their sperm and then they bought a woman's eggs. Then they used in vitro fertilization to create a human. And then they rented a poor woman's uterus because, by the way, most surrogates aren't doing it because it's like they're a loving aunt who's trying to help out their cousin who can't have kids. No, it's usually they're being paid. They need money. And then these two gay dudes, they rented a poor woman's uterus. They paid her for the baby. They took the baby home and started sexually abusing these kids. Like that's happening in America right now, Ashley. That's happening in the UK and in Canada and in the West right now. There's no laws against it. Okay. Like, so I'm going to be releasing a talk on my podcast soon, the Seth Gruber Show, that I just gave to a group of state legislators in Texas representing from 33 different states on IVF and big fertility. So if that's of any interest, we'll probably post it in the next month or so before Christmas. But so we talked about all of this. There are no laws against this. It's totally legal. So if we have artificial wombs, what do you think is going to happen? One, the pedophiles and the single males who want kids, that'll be easier than ever. That'll be easier than ever for them. And then the abortion industry and groups that want to harvest organs of babies, especially in blue states where abortion's legal through point of birth, right? Because when Roe v. Wade got overturned, it sends it back to the states, right? So in New York, California, Washington, Oregon, for example, that's going to lead to factory farming of human beings for their organs. Not to mention, have we ever thought about what it's like for a human being to grow and through a prenatal stage with zero human connection? Like we're in like Brave New World. I don't even know how to think about this. This is like every human being ever created, Ashley, has been in the womb of a woman. Every human being for all of human history has known its origins in its connection to his mother. Now, sometimes that mother is not the biological mother, right? Because of in vitro fertilization. So sometimes it's like, well, my bio mother's different. But for the baby, that birth mother is the only woman they know. That baby, okay, right, whose bio mother is someone else because it was a different woman's eggs, and then IVF, and the baby was implanted in a birth mother. Okay, whatever. The kid doesn't know that.
right.
For the baby, all they know is the woman whose body and voice they have known from the word go,
Mm,
whose tonalities, whose laugh, whose movie preferences, whose food preferences is all of their preferences.
mm,
The mother who's walking and running is a rhythm that they grow to know, whose voice is the only voice that can calm them as a semi-functioning nervous system, because an
mm,
infant's nervous system is still like, learning how to operate. The mother's voice and body becomes almost part of their central nervous system in those first few weeks. And now you're talking about creating babies and humans in a robot
mm.
with no connection to another human. This has never been done before. And China's not that far off from artificial wombs, by the way, Ashley. They're very close to it. Is this going to lead to soulless creatures who, as infants, don't even know how to respond to human voices because they were gestated in a robot? Like, this stuff is coming to the West very quickly, and we need to ban it before it does. So, anyways, I have strong opinions about that.
I never thought about it that way. I mean, when I read it, I was like, "Oh, okay," because I do have friends who,
Yeah, people
they
think
they
like, "Oh,
they
more babies. Isn't that a good thing?" But how you do things matters. How you do things matters, bro.
Oh, what do you
Well,
hope
we've
to
had a
accomplish?
broad-ranging
We
conversation.
did, we did, we did,
Unfortunately, I'm running out of time, but what I
no,
hope to
it's
accomplish
okay.
is to
It's okay.
awaken normal Americans who are half decent people. I'm convinced most Americans are half decent people, but they've just been lied to. They don't know the origins of bad ideas. Listen, ideas have consequences and bad
Yeah.
ideas have victims.
Yes.
Ideas are incredibly powerful. Most people function off of an ideology or a worldview that they've absorbed or imbibed or assumed. but they actually they couldn't give you language to what that worldview is. They've just kind of
Right.
assumed it from the culture, from the shows they watch, the podcasts they listen to, right? The friends they hang out with. Ideas are
Right.
very important because they drive our decisions. They drive how we vote. They drive our we have a lot of bad ideas in America that have been assumed for a long time. What's that say? Is like, be careful what you assume. Like,
Right. Right.
make an ass out of you and me. We have a lot of ideas that have been assumed, and they need to be re-examined. And so what we do at the White Rose Resistance as a digital media and activism organization is to expose bad ideas, promote good ideas, create things that are true, good, and beautiful through our films, and awaken particularly the local church to stand against evil and protect women and children once again, which has always been the heritage of the church.
Yeah, and this would probably be one of my two questions I want to say quickly is that you started screenings at the churches.
Yeah.
And church has a very complicated history with race itself. And so why the church?
Well, I'm a Christian. I believe in the Son of God who entered human history in a uterus, and predicted and pulled off his own resurrection to redeem mankind from their sins.
Mm,
I believe that Christianity is the origins of Western civilization. Christianity gave us the concept of human dignity, of the sanctity of human life, of the right to life. I'm reading an interesting book right now called When Children Became People: The
mm,
Birth of Childhood in Early Christianity by O.M. Bake. And basically his contention, and we kind of know this, I think, at a gut level, anyone that's done a little bit of history research, but basically Christianity gave us the concept of children's rights. Christianity gave us the concept of women's rights. And by women's rights, I don't mean the right to kill your baby as it's used today, but I mean that, like, hey, women are actually valuable, dignified human beings who, though they may be weaker than your normal run-of-the-mill man, their value is the same. And in
mm,
ancient Rome, and in the first, and well, certainly in ancient Rome preceding Christ, but even in the 100 years following Christ, as Christianity began to be persecuted, but it started to change society, women were viewed as the property of their husbands. Children were not even viewed as persons, including after birth. Like,
right.
there was this Roman concept called paterfamilias, that a child was not considered to be a person until the father decided, okay, I accept you as my son. You can be part of our family.
Mm,
Until then, they could just be abandoned, killed, dissected, placed in the forest to be eaten by animals. Like,
mm,
we look at some of these practices with outright disgust, rightly so. But I don't think most Western people who are so woke and modern understand that, like, hey, listen, whether you believe in Christ or not, you can thank Christianity
mm,
for Western civilization. You can thank Christianity for the fact that we don't sacrifice women and children anymore, that women aren't viewed as the sexual objects and of their husbands,
right.
but are equal in dignity and value and rights. You can thank Christianity for the fact that kids aren't just the sex toys of perverted males with no legal protection. One of
Mm,
the first things that revival has always produced historically, Ashley, was a concern for and protection of women and children. It's one of the first fruits that revival's always produced. Um, so the fact that we're going back in the West now to where children are endangered again and women's spaces and rights are endangered once again through the trans movement and the removal of their trophies in athletics and forcing them to see naked men in their locker rooms and restrooms because the dude now says he's a girl. That's one of the first signs you're going back to neo-paganism, is
yeah.
when women and children are endangered once again. And so why the church was your question? Because the church historically has been the most powerful organism for change, because
Mm,
we believe that we're accountable to a higher power. And we're
mm,
going to stand before the King of Kings one day, and we're going to give an account to how we lived, how we stewarded what we were given.
yeah.
Regardless of who the president is at the time, regardless of who the emperor or prime minister is at the time, you know what? Screw you. I'm going to be accountable to my king one day, and I'm going to have to
Mm,
answer how I lived with what I was given. That matters more to me. Caesar, you're not the ultimate king. The king
mm,
Kings has given you the authority that you have on earth, and we ultimately owe allegiance to him. Those
mm,
attitudes threatened the Roman imperial power structures at the time. But Christianity was not persecuted, Ashley, because they worshiped a god. They were persecuted because they said he's the only God and we will not worship any others.
mhm, mhm,
The Caesars would have been fine if the Christians worshiped Caesar and Jesus. It was the exclusivity of the claims of Christianity that there's only one God and creator, and we owe our lives to him, that became the threat to those cultures. Because here's a group of people, Christians, who are saying that if their God and their faith in Jesus runs into conflict with the modern political structures of the day, that they're going to defy us and give allegiance to the real king. We don't like that. Well, that
Mhm.
Christianity began to go around the whole globe and turn civilizations right side up. And it gave us the concept of equal rights, the rule of law, the sanctity of life, and the dignity of women and children that we're seeming to be abandoning in the West at an awfully scary rate. And so until we get back to our heritage as Christians,
Mm.
which is resistance against evil, standing up for the least of these, the voiceless, the marginalized, the victimized, the young, the unloved.
Mm.
Until we get back to our heritage, I don't think we're going to be preserving anything that matters in this republic for the sake of future generations.
Mm.
And so that's what we're focused on, is with the local church, standing up for the unborn, children, and the family.
Mm. Thank you. There's some last question.
Yeah.
What surprised you the most?
Um, there's so many shocking aspects about the origin of all of these ideas in the 20th century. I think probably the thing that shocked me the most in the 1916 Project, which again is a book and film for people who are interested, they can go to the1916project.com, the1916project.com. Probably the most shocking aspect was actually Planned Parenthood's role in the sexualization of our children.
Mm.
So Planned Parenthood is the largest provider of the pornographic filth in the schools, called sex ed, but it's not the birds and the bees. It's called comprehensive sexuality education, and it includes gender theory, transgenderism, anal sex, thruples, gay marriage, abortion. It teaches kids how to circumvent the law in many states and get a judicial bypass, so a teenager can get an abortion without parental consent. That's in a lot of the comprehensive sexuality education. It pits children against their parents. It actually will often teach this sort of gender concept by using what they call the genderbread man. People can go Google that. This was very popular in the last few years, teaching transgenderism to minors in the schools. It's called the genderbread man, to explain how there's so many genders and it's however you identify. So all of that kind of filth that brought so many angry moms and dads to school board meetings the last 5 years, which is like an organic grassroots movement, because of the filth they were showing to kids. Planned Parenthood was integral in all of that. In 1964, Planned Parenthood's medical director, Mary Calderon, left Planned Parenthood and founded SIECUS. It stands for the Sexuality Information Education Council of the United States.
Mhm.
SIECUS became the pioneer and the architect in what became comprehensive sexuality education, which is just all this filth that's one, most of it's all a lie. Secondly, even if it wasn't a lie, it's totally inappropriate for kids. Okay, so they were the architect of that in 1964, called SIECUS. People, you can go Google this. SIECUS, SIECUS. Their new name is SIECUS. Sex ed for social change. So they're admitting in their name, we use sex ed to change the social fabric. It's not just about communicating biological facts. And so Mary Calderon, Planned Parenthood's medical director, founds that in 1964 with seed money from Hugh Hefner, the founder of Playboy magazine.
Mm.
And their first board member at SIECUS was Wardell Pomeroy. And Wardell Pomeroy was one of Alfred Kinsey's many gay lovers. And Wardell Pomeroy was described by Time magazine in a 1980 interview as being part of the pro-incest lobby.
Oh
The
God.
pro-incest lobby, so sex between family members and their kids. That was Wardell Pomeroy, and he said to Time magazine in 1980, I think I have this in my book as well. He said, incest between children and adults can sometimes be an emotionally satisfying experience. So when you hear people say that Planned Parenthood and the sexual revolutionaries are targeting our kids, they're
Mhm.
kind of down with the pedophilic stuff. They're kind of down with pedophiles, and people go, "Oh, shut up! You're ridiculous. That's a slippery slope argument. Nobody's real." No, that's literally the origins of all of that. What are you talking about? All of Alfred Kinsey's science, most of it was based off of interviewing rapists who were raping kids and
Mm.
giving Kinsey their sexual data that became the basis for arguing that all human beings are sexual from birth and that there's no sexual experiences that are damaging to children. That was the whole basis of Kinsey's fraudulent, demonic, and pedophilic science. Well, one of his gay lovers and researchers, Wardell Pomeroy, becomes the founding board member of SIECUS, which was founded by Planned Parenthood's medical director with seed money from Playboy magazine. So the pornography industry is funding all the filth that becomes the sexualizing of kids in the schools by showing them porn under the mantle of health and education. So Planned Parenthood is not just an abortion organization. They're way more than that. They always have been. And that was one of the more shocking aspects. But
Wow.
anyways, I got to go. But people can go to the 1916project.com. They can watch the film on Daily Wire Plus, or they can buy the DVD. I know that's crazy old school DVDs.
Yeah.
But it is streaming on Daily Wire Plus, and you can get the book anywhere you get books. So thank you,
Well,
Ashley.
Seth, thank you. And thank you, viewer. I want to thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. I learned a lot. And remember, y'all, God is love, and God wants us to show his love to the world. Until next time, later.
Amen. I got to